Welcome to A Drop of Silence, the groundbreaking podcast series that dives deep into the realms of controversy. Join us as we bring special guests who share their extraordinary experiences and offer unparalleled insight into history, today's news headlines, and the future. Get ready to embark on a thought-provoking journey where silence speaks volumes and the truth lies somewhere beneath the surface.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor.
Shalom, everyone. My guest this week is Irene Moore Davis. I chose Irene to be a guest on my podcast series. Well, frankly, just because I absolutely adore her. I've never met anybody who is smarter than her and has more intuition and intellect when it comes to walking in another man's shoes. And I really wanted you to meet this wonderful lady and try and understand where she comes from, because she's absolutely fascinating. And I think she's hit the nail on the head. I hope you enjoy it. With me today is one of my all-time favorite people. She's as beautiful as she is on the inside as she is on the outside. Irene Moore Davis is an educator, historian, writer, podcaster, and community advocate who speaks and writes frequently about things near and dear to my heart: equity, diversity, inclusion, and African Canadian history. She's a graduate of the University of Windsor, Western University, and Queen's University, and she currently teaches at Clair College and Huron University. Irene's published work, and this is what I am most interested in, has included poetry, history, and journalism. She has also producer credits, and that includes the award-winning The North Was Our Canaan, Across the River to Freedom. And in 2022, Irene was the recipient of the Harriet Tubman Award for Commitment to a Purpose from the Ontario Black Historical Society. And she also received the Ontario Lieutenant Governor's Heritage Award. And she was named to the 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women. And she lives here in Windsor, and we're so glad she does. Welcome, Irene. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
Oh, we're doing. Spilling things everywhere. We're just having a great time recording things. But now let's get serious. The reason I asked you on here, because you and I have talked about this a couple of times, and which is walking in another man's shoes. And there seems to be a profound lack of that capability in today's society. And I've taken care of patients who were Jewish and they thought nothing of going to Selma and walking across that bridge with Martin Luther King Jr. And I can't even begin to think of how many protest march that I was in Detroit, and we went to Washington, and it just seemed to be a thing that people do. And now it's like nobody cares, or they'll only jump on the bandwagon if they're going to protest somebody or they hate somebody. So you are very experienced and knowledgeable. So what is your take on today's society with that?
I mean, I think that obviously there are exceptions to everything that we're saying. There are people who really take allyship very seriously. I know people, and I have been people who have shown up when there were, protests about Islamophobia and the, dreadful impact that has on our community. There have certainly been allies showing up in large numbers for the the need to support 2S LGBTQ plus people who are enduring some of these terrible anti-queer and anti-trans protests that have been happening lately. And there certainly have been allies showing up to walk with Indigenous people, walk alongside Indigenous people after the residential schools crisis came to the light for many Canadians, not for Indigenous people, because they always knew about the burials and the terrible atrocities that had happened in the residential schools for Indigenous people. But as more Canadians of non-Indigenous backgrounds found out, certainly a lot more have been involved in those protests. But there is a bit of bandwagonism that occurs when something is really hot in the news. You're more likely to see people coming out and being supportive, marching with signs, marching with their feet, singing the protest songs, and so on. The question becomes, after those news items become old news, how much commitment is there to walking in other people's shoes? I do think that there is a profound lack of empathy that becomes more and more apparent every year. And I don't know if that's me getting older and kind of having that kids get off my lawn moment where I feel like society's going downhill. Maybe that's a generational thing. But there does seem to be a lack of empathy, and I think it has a lot to do with sort of the increased individualism that people have. People are more about like, if it feels good to me, if it feels right to me, then it's the right way to go, as opposed to maybe being as encouraged to and as committed to see how things work out for all of society for the greater good. It's like, if it's good for me, if it's working for me, then I'm going to go that direction. I'm going to choose that path. I see a lot more of that. And it's often very emotional and not really rational. It's like, I want to do what feels right to me, not what seems like a good plan for me and for my community.
So, I mean, when you look at like for me, when I look at society in today, I'm thinking, why do these people not know what they should know? And I keep going back to the school system. They're not taught history. They're not taught geography. They're not taught social studies, like these are the laws and this is how things should be. And these are the fights that have already happened, like the suffragettes, like Black Lives Matter. Like, why do people not know about these things? And I don't know. To me, I guess that's why I think nobody can walk in somebody else's shoes, because they don't have the history. They don't have those skills. I feel like us older people have let the younger people down.
I think that there's some of that. I mean, some of the responsibility is borne by the education system and the reduced content about social movements and things of that nature. But, people also used to learn that stuff from their families, from their communities. Yeah. And there was a different kind of community in the past too. I think, when you and I speak, we're not a representative sample of what's going on out there in society, but I recognize sort of some changes, some demographic shifts that have happened. People are not so inclined to belong to institutions or organizations anymore. Mm-hmm. A lot of people haven't been brought up in a system where they have Girl Guides and Scouts and, things that kind of bring groups of people together and teach them about ethics and about how we conduct ourselves in society. A lot of people have sort of fractured or reduced or disrupted family relationships so that they're not spending as much time with kinfolk and older members of the family and people that sort of teach you things and share stories. There's just a lot more individualism. People kind of, and I'm not speaking of all people, but I think that increasingly we see human beings in North American society who kind of live on their own, connect with people in very, very superficial ways, kind of around content that's of interest, but don't really have those deep conversations about these kinds of experiences, lived experiences, how these social movements happened, why unions came to be and why they're important and why workers need to get together. Like all of those kinds of conversations, we see a lot of people kind of pulling away from those institutions, those organizations, those networks, those ways of connecting with other humans. And then, of course, you had this mass global trauma, which was the COVID pandemic that led to greater isolation and people just sort of being at home behind screens, looking only at the content that the algorithms, select for them based on their previous viewing practices. So there's that too, like less access, I think, in a time when we have so much access to information and we think we can just put our hands on any kind of information. In fact, the kinds of information that appear on our screens, depending on how we access information, can be very much chosen for us based on our past practices and our past viewing experiences and our past searches, so that we don't necessarily hear those other alternate perspectives. And from the other people in whose shoes we might metaphorically walk, we may not get those perspectives as often. We may only hear from people who sound like us and think just like us. So there are a lot of reasons why this might be happening.
Yeah. It's very disconcerting. I remember as a kid, the biggest thing that happened in the summertime was Emancipation Day at Jackson Park. Everybody and their brother went. It didn't matter if you were white or African American or if you were Polish or Jewish. Everybody went, and the kids ran amok, and it was just perfectly normal to play soccer, and just have kids of all different kinds of kids playing. And we don't have anything like that anymore. And I'm not sure what the solution is for that, but I think we need to go back to that. And I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, let's even look at this beautiful holistic example that you just shared. There was a community festival that was created by one particular ethnocultural community, the Underground Railroad Descendant community in Windsor, but everybody went to it. And kids just ran amok, as you said. They played, they got together without all kinds of parental supervision. They learned about other people. They learned about other cultures. They had fun being kids. They were unpoliced, basically. They were just working things out amongst themselves. I mean, I find for a lot of us that grew up in Windsor, Ontario, or the surrounding areas prior to kind of the current system of things, we weren't supervised all the time. We went to the park, and there you would see Black kids and white kids and kids from French Canadian families and kids from English Canadian families and Ukrainian and Polish and Hungarian and Italian families and everybody getting together, playing in the park, working out their differences, learning how to get along with other people, learning about other people's family traditions, learning how to swear in each other's languages, like all those things we did as kids. Think about a kid's experience now. You're like driven to school, you're picked up at school, you're heavily policed. If you're playing, it's like you're on a team, you're being taken to soccer practice or you're being taken to your football game, but you're not really having a lot of those unsupervised play opportunities with other kids. So even in that way, that's a way, like, based on safety and based on scheduling and so on, that has resulted in greater silos around even kids as they're growing up. They're not getting the same kind of exposure. And if they are, it's kind of in an official classroom context where it's multicultural day at the school and we're going to, share stories, or we're going to have people come in and dance in their ethnic attire or that kind of thing. But it's not just that natural curiosity exchange of information and growing up holistically with a group of other people, which is what Windsor used to be known for.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's
compared
true.
to a lot of other communities. So, I mean, I think, what do we do about this? I don't know. I think it takes some conversations about, how do we get involved with people who don't look just like us and think just like us? And how do we, select our information differently? How much time are we willing to spend sitting with our families and maybe watching a documentary about the past, watching a PBS documentary or something, and seeing, what was the civil rights movement like, or what was it like for workers in the coal mines in a particular part of North America, or what was it like for Irish Canadians or Irish Americans? Like all of these kinds of things that a lot of us grew up knowing, partly because we were curious and wanted to learn about these things, but partly because we heard from people who had those kinds of experiences, and I don't think people do now. There's also a desire to sometimes insulate kids and young people from anything that's unpleasant about the past, whereas it's really a prime opportunity to learn from the past, learn how not to replicate those mistakes, and learn how to keep things moving in a positive direction.
Yeah, I'm my granddaughter. She comes up with some doozies of questions that I'm just like, wow, you have a lot of sophistication there. But I don't think that sophistication in her thought process. And I think it's because she's being raised Jewish and she's trying to fit in to a group of kids who, like, she's the only Jewish kid from grade 1 to 5, except for her brother. And I think I don't know. I think it has to do with educating kids in a different way than what they're being educated. I really think we have to learn the history, the basics of history and all of that. And that takes some serious discussion. And I don't know as if the older people who are in boards of education are prepared to look at the mistakes they made and how they educated kids. Do you
think that's a piece of it for sure. I mean, certainly one of the main things that I do with one of the organizations in which I'm involved, the Essex County Black Historical Research Society, is to work with the school boards, the English school boards at least, to make sure that teachers feel confident teaching Black history, that they have ample resources, that we have conversations with them about how to teach it and sort of the language to use, and take away some of those fears about saying the wrong thing, provide them with more local resources that they won't easily find online or in the books that they have access to, so that they can say, you know, right here in this neighborhood, here's what happened and this is why it's exciting. And I think that more communities probably could do that in terms of making sure that their stories are told. But we also have to be somewhat conscious of the fact that K-12 teachers only have so many hours available to them, and there are a lot of requirements of them. There are a lot of expectations that they need to cover. So we can't necessarily look to just the schools to get those points across. It's also about working with community organizations and with parents and guardians and families, and making sure that everybody has access to great information and can share it and knows how to start those conversations. I think, for example, just to use my cultural community as one example, although there are many, you know, when we're thinking about Black History Month, or when we're thinking about our carousel villages, or when we're thinking about those other opportunities where we have the public's attention, you know, what are the ways that we can make this this content appealing for students and helpful for families, so that they can bring kids on a Saturday or whatever and learn more about this history and have, you know, those really helpful conversation starters that they might go home and ponder more. And I think that, you know, we need more of that too, for all communities, for all points of view.
Yeah, I agree. I can't help but think libraries could be used in a special way to do that. Windsor has over 248 different ethnic groups.
Yes.
And
this is still one of the most ethnoculturally diverse countries, or cities in Canada. It's incredible, isn't it?
I know. And I'm sitting there thinking, we basically get along, you know, and I mean, it was always such a thrill when people would come over from out of town and say, oh, you want Vietnamese food, you want Ethiopian, you want this, you want that. And off we'd go to whatever nationality they wanted. I don't know. I'm always finding myself very frustrated with this, because I remember when I think I was 5 when it happened. Martin Luther King Jr. came to the Emancipation Day. And I mean, I didn't know who the heck he was. I mean, I'm 5, I'm stupid, you know, but he came and played soccer with us. And I just, oh, he's a great guy, you know. And then when he was killed, and then I actually looked at, I said, oh, because I have a thing about eyes. I always think you have gorgeous eyes. And I said, I know those eyes. And my mother said, yeah, you played soccer with him when you were 5. So I don't know what we do with this. Like, who do we appeal to? If you know, or are people, have we gone too far that people don't think this is a concern anymore?
I think a lot of people don't think it's a concern anymore. Maybe we've gone too far. I mean, I haven't given up hope, but we're not even just talking about cultural awareness. We're talking about gender. We're talking about class. We're talking about ageism and ableism and all of those things. How do we get people to care? How do we get people to care about buildings that aren't accessible? And, to notice that maybe this isn't a fair and just situation for people that have mobility issues to go, to access this service or to go and enjoy this kind of entertainment or whatever. We all need to care more about those things. And I think it's partly just, thinking outside the box and having access to people that don't look and think and live just like you. But it's also like, how do we just get people to have more empathy, not even just cultural awareness, but just more empathy generally? Those are big conversations. I know character education is a big piece of what the school boards are focusing on nowadays, with especially the K to 12 students, JK to 12 students, but especially with the elementary students, they're really focusing on those pillars such as integrity and empathy and a sense of community and all of those things, hard work, responsibility. And I'm hopeful that some of that work is kind of sinking in and having an impact on young people. But I mean, young people learn most from what they see around them and the people they observe and the way that their parents and aunts and uncles and role models are behaving. Yeah. And we all have to do better in terms of having that sense of what other people are dealing with and caring about what other people are dealing with. I know when I'm involved in political campaigns, and I'm not going to speak specifically about my party, but I know when I'm standing on doorsteps and I'm talking to people, I get a very vivid sense of people, not all people, but a lot of people only caring about the issues that affect them directly. Yes. Like they're going to vote for whatever's going to be most beneficial for them, even if there's another group of people, a whole group of people being harmed by the policies of the party they're supporting. We've kind of got to get away from that and just sort of find ways to encourage people to think beyond just themselves. I find literature and movies and things of that nature, even though it sounds trite and it sounds maybe like I'm being flippant, when we tap into people's imaginations and have them connect with a character or a group of characters who aren't like them, that often has an impact that maybe just reading about a situation in the newspaper doesn't. I mean, I think we can all come up with examples of movies or books that changed the way that we thought about a situation or about a group of people. I think we can name very specific examples throughout history of books, for example, that made a lot of people notice what a whole other group of people were going through and care about it in a deeper way. And I think that there's, a role for the arts to play in building that kind of empathy, because we do walk in other people's shoes when we're reading a novel, when we're connecting with a character, or when we're really engrossed in a movie or a television show. So those things matter too.
What do you think about banned books? How do we stop that? Because a lot of the books you're talking about, like I remember reading Uncle Tom's Cabin when I was in grade school. And what was more impressive than the story itself was the fact that it was a white woman who recognized that there was this, that's how it was taught to us. Here was a white woman in the 1800s who wasn't respected herself, but who recognized that the people she was writing about were more oppressed than she was, and she still had the courage to go on. And I like almost every banned book you look at is they're trying to stop that kind of information. And I think locally we can take great pride that Harriet Beecher Stowe actually took her inspiration from the autobiography and the story of Josiah Henson, a local hero right here, and was, inspired to write that novel, so that, they always say Josiah Henson was the real Uncle Tom. That word, that term has taken a turn now lately in terms of how people view it, but he was the inspiration for sure. I mean, banned books, it's unfortunate. I know that there's a desire to protect kids. There's a desire to make sure that kids are sheltered from certain language or certain controversial topics. But the fact is that kids need to learn about the experiences of others, and that learning about the experiences of others and about unjust systems of oppression in our society, that's always going to be controversial. There's no way to have just a light, fun, happy-go-lucky novel about enslavement of human beings, or about a girl hiding
in a room in the Holocaust, or about the civil rights and the denial of civil rights, or about the residential schools situation that Indigenous kids went through. Like, those are always going to be hard topics to cover, but we need kids and we need adults to access those stories and to really learn at a deep emotional level as well as an intellectual level about what happened and what people go through. Many of us, there are so many examples, but many of us learned about, for example, the experiences of kids in other parts of the world by reading books from other parts of the world, not by just, watching commercials about feed the children or whatever. I mean, I think that, that's a really important way to learn. And I think it's unfortunate that the impulse is always to protect kids by removing any literature that might upset them or offend them in some way. I think that kids need the teachers to be responsible in the way that they teach these books. I think that teachers need to go through some training and some real reflection about how to introduce these kinds of books in a classroom setting. Librarians need to do that too, because there is some sensitive content. But the idea shouldn't be to just rip them away and not let anyone have access to them.
Or we could vote somebody like you in as mayor of the city who just controls everything, who knows how to do it. I feel this is an important move for you, Irene.
Oh my goodness. There are many really quality people working in elected roles, and I'm so grateful that for the most part we do have people that are trying to do the right thing, even if they have different ways of going about it.
But
we always need the community to argue, not to argue, but to advocate for the things that really matter, because even the most respectable and reputable politicians respond to the loudest group often.
Yes. Yeah, it's always the way. I know. But I really think that we nailed it. I think it has to do with the education. And you start educating the kids, and then you include the parents in the participation of those movements or programs that they're offering at the schools. I've always been a firm believer that education is going to be what saves us in the end.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we just at the point when we're recording this, we just went through the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So I don't know how many times I saw that epic quote from Murray Sinclair saying that education got us into this mess, and it's education that will get us out of it.
Yeah.
And that's so true of so many things in society, not just Indigenous reconciliation with settlers.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Irene, for coming on. I hope you'll come on podcast again, and we'll just spew off again. And maybe by then you'll be mayor, or you'll be a counselor, or at least the head of the Board of Education.
You're so funny. I enjoy being an armchair quarterback and commenting on things.
Me too. But no, thank you so much. You're very insightful, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Have a great day.
You too.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor.
This podcast is brought to you by Unbreakable Bindings Publishing Company. Executive produced by Lori Baldassi. Produced by Ryan Richardson. Hosted by Pam Goldstein.